my favorites. Hello, welcome. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Tonight, we're going to be talking with Michelle Parise, who is the author of Alone, a Love Story, a fantastic book, one of my favorite memoirs of the season. My name is Brandon. I'm one of the buyers at Indigo, and I buy for biography and memoir. So super excited that you're joining us. We are going to turn the comments off, so feel free to chime in and let us know where you're joining us from tonight. But I'm going to introduce Michelle very quickly here to the chat. So hopefully we'll have a moment to see where you're all coming from, but I'm going to invite her in now. So stay with us for a minute and I will get Michelle into the chat. Okay, so I'm getting Michelle in. If you have never heard of Michelle Parise, her podcast, Alone, a Love Story, is sort of where this book came from. And there she is. Hi, Michelle. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
So good. It's such a pleasure to chat with you tonight, and I'm so excited to share your story with the rest of the folks here. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. I'm so excited.
So I'm wondering if you can sort of give us a quick overview of who you are and what the book is about.
Okay. I'm Michelle Parise, and I've been a journalist at CBC for the past 24 years, just my entire adult life. I worked at Swiss Chalet and then CBC, and yeah, and my book. This is my first book, and it's called Alone, a Love Story, and yeah. I'm going to take these headphones out because I'm getting weird feedback.
Okay.
So Alone, a Love Story, it's a story about love and loss and how you can figure out next steps when your whole life is turned upside down overnight,
And
basically.
Speaking of our lives being turned upside down overnight, I want to get into, what the book is about and everything. But I just want to start off by asking, how are you doing in this current situation where the world is so strange for everyone right now?
I'm doing okay. I have MS, so the drug I take every day is an immunosuppressant, and that means I've been mostly inside for the past 2 months. And so it's been okay because I'm very fortunate. I think that I can work from home and I have a job still, so that's very fortunate. And also I have a partner now, so he's been doing all the cooking and grocery shopping and stuff like that. And also I have someone to hug, which is nice. But I do wonder about what would this be like if it was, even a year ago and I was still single and alone. And I think it would be really hard. I'm very conscious. I'm very aware of people who are living alone and that it's hard for some people. And a lot of my friends and family who do live alone.
Yeah, and I think, that's one of the sort of core ideas of the book is loneliness, right? And that feeling of it. Do you have any advice for people that are feeling very lonely right now?
I feel like the best advice is just to sort of remember the things that you love about being alone. When I was going through it, the thing that worked for me was exposure therapy. So basically I had to force myself to sit in my apartment alone, which was a thing I really didn't want to do ever. It took me 5 years to get used to the fact that I could just come home after work to an empty apartment. I really couldn't do that. And I remember actually the psychologist I was seeing at the time, she said, what will happen if you go home? And I'm like, well, it's dark and empty there, and there's no life inside. And she was like, well, then what will happen? And I said, well, I'll just cry and cry and freak out and cry. And she said, and then what will happen? And I said, I don't know. I'll just keep crying. And she said, and will that happen forever? And I said, no. And she goes, so then what will you do? And then I realized, well, I guess I would read a book. I love reading. I guess I could play guitar. I could write. I really love sewing. And then I started to think of all these things that I actually loved doing when no one else was around. And I basically had to force myself to like remember the things that brought me joy about being alone. I don't know if that's very helpful because nothing replaces like physical contact. And like right now, there's just a lot of people who haven't had any physical contact, and that's really hard. I find it very hard.
Yeah, I hear you, and I think, but that is such I mean, like books, I think are a perfect thing like that, right? It is a solitary activity, but it can bring so much comfort to people. I think, you know, reconnecting with the love of reading at this time could be something that really helps people get through it. So, or, you know, like you said, there's so many activities that you can do by yourself that do bring joy in some way.
Yeah, and like reading is great, I think, because it's a reminder, like it's a way of like getting immersed in someone else's life that I'm sorry, I can't. We're just going to take 1 second and plug this in.
Please go ahead for it. Yeah,
Sorry.
no worries. Again, if you're just joining us, we're with Michelle Parise tonight. We are talking about her memoir, Alone, a Love Story, which is one of my favorite memoirs of this.
Okay. Thanks for saying that. I think, you know, I'm just going to deal with this feedback. If you don't hear it, then that's great.
I know someone is saying that some of the audio is not great on their end, so I'll try to turn mine down a little bit, and we'll see if that helps out a little bit.
Okay.
So let's talk about the book and how you got to this sort of lonely place that you're talking about. The book kind of starts with this kind of bombshell revelation from your husband at the time that he's been having an affair. And so I was thinking, you know, what did you turn to in that moment and over the course of those coming sort of weeks and months, and what worked well for you in terms of dealing with that betrayal?
I mean, unfortunately, the truth is that I turned to things that at first, the first things I turned to were not good for me. I turned to alcohol, which was something I never did before, and I basically drank every day for a year and a half as a way to just numb myself, I guess. And the other thing I did that was completely different and not maybe great was, you know, I just started going to bars all the time because I couldn't be alone, and I also didn't want to be alone at the same, you know. And so I would just go and meet strangers for the purpose of just having sex with them and never seeing them again. And that was the first phase of coping, which, you know, but that was how I dealt with it. And so, and I needed the alcohol to numb myself to the fact that I was having these temporary pairings that didn't have love, which was the only way I was used to experiencing something like, well, the only way previously I was used to experiencing sex. And so it was a really difficult time, and those are the ways I dealt with it at first. But also all through it, I was writing, and so that is a good way of getting through things. And I learned also to like accept the help of people and ask for help. Also, things I never really did before. Like I asked a lot from my friends and family, I think, in terms of needing everything from them having to just listen to me talk about this nonstop, like right up until today, basically. You know, yeah. So accepting help and being like okay with that those were the good things. And writing.
That's great. And I think like that's something that I really connected with just as a reader myself, that idea of, you know, sometimes your drive to be self-sufficient kind of can put you in a bad place, and reaching out to people. I think that's something that I really took away from the book. And I want to thank you just as a reader, because I think that's something that I need to be reminded of sometimes, just on a personal level.
That's nice.
but I think the main thing that I really love about the book, and that I think readers are really going to connect with as they start getting their hands on it, is just how raw and real you are. You really don't hold a lot back, and I think that's really
no.
I was wondering, is that just who you are? Did you have any second thoughts about going to some of those places in the book, or was it just let's put it all down?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that I put down that didn't make it into the book, first of all. But I think the way that I approach writing is just to write everything. Like, I just write and write and write and write, and not to worry too much about structure or narrative arc or anything, really, at first. It just, there's a lot of just writing. And so I didn't feel at any point like I was revealing too much with what I went with in the final product. There were definitely things that I took out. But I think that rawness is what like people really connect with the most. There's like an authenticity to that because I'm not shying away from showing the ugly parts of myself. It's not just about like I'm a victim and this was a terrible thing and it's an entire book about despair, because I don't think that's very interesting. Like, what's interesting are people. We're all the same, right? Like, we are all very nuanced and we have many different sides to ourselves, and sometimes those sides are contradictory. I'm definitely not like, it's kind of a classic hero's journey tale, but like, I'm very much not a hero, right? Like, you know what I mean? It's a real, just like, bad things happen, then I do bad things, then like, and then you're just trying to figure it out. And so, in terms of telling the stories that I told, that people have said like, oh, you're so brave, or I couldn't have done this, or, I just feel like I knew I created something very good out of something really bad. And I just couldn't see why it would be something to be afraid of, to like share that with others.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I think one of the things that I love asking memoirists is, I think in the book, you strike a really compassionate tone about everyone in the story. And like, even, your ex-husband who does this horrible thing and kicks you into this sort of new world. I think he comes across as a sort of understandable and flawed, but real person. Do you think that you could have written this book at a different time, or did you need time to like process your emotions about it to get it down into the form that it is today?
Oh no, I was writing it as it was happening. So there was I think the opposite of what you just said, actually. I don't think I could, like, if I just sat down today, 8 years later, to write it, I don't think I could have written it with the same urgency or that same, I don't know. It's because I was writing as I was going. As everything was happening, I was writing. And sometimes that writing was garbage or whatever, but like then later I took it and fixed it up, but a lot of the vignettes, like the little stories in the book, are almost verbatim how I wrote them on the back of a napkin. And, yeah, like there is an entire vignette that I wrote on the back of 6 TTC receipts, and that's pretty much the way it didn't change. Like, so wow. If I wrote it after the fact, I don't think I would remember things with the same detail. And also, I mean, there's so many things in it, like 90% of it, like when I read it now, or even when I was performing it for the podcast, where I was like, man, I do not feel this way at all anymore. But it was like very important for me to like retain the emotional, like, content, not just the content, but the state of mind I was in when I wrote it,
And that comes across. Like, I think, one of the things that you get from this book is like you feel those things that you're feeling. It really comes across in the writing. And I think there is a sort of, even though you play around with the timeline a little bit and you jump around a little, which is fun, I think it really comes across as, we're with you in that moment. It's great. So you mentioned the podcast. I want to talk about that really quickly. So
sure.
My understanding of it is that you wrote this as a memoir, right? And then you sort of broke it out into the podcast and then came back to it as a book. Is that right?
Yeah, it's weird. I I wrote a book. Like I didn't know I was writing a book, and then I was like, "Oh, this is a book," basically. And then I flirted with publishing it, and it almost got published. But then there were a bunch of things that happened, and I decided not to publish it. And then I was just sitting on this thing that I knew from all the people who had read that manuscript. They were like, "Oh my gosh, this has to be out in the world. Like, this is very beautiful and very real. And like, people need to read this." And I was like, "Well, maybe I'll self-publish." And then I thought, "Oh, like, why don't I turn it into some kind of like audio thing?" And then that's what I did. I pitched it to a CBC podcast. So even though I work at CBC, I still had to pitch them. And they still had to accept it, and they accepted only 10 episodes. So then I had to adapt. Like the book is in 3 parts. And so I was like, okay, 3 seasons maybe, but they weren't telling me I could have 3 seasons necessarily. So I had to make the first season, which was 10 episodes, adapted in such a way that it would make sense if I didn't get any more seasons, if it was just, you know. Yeah. So it took some finagling and adapting, in the sense of like, there are a lot of things in different order than in the book, because again, I had to pitch the second season, and then even though it was like a huge success, I still had to pitch the 3rd season. They didn't give me special treatment, I'll tell you that.
If you're just joining us, we're chatting with Michelle Parise, who's the author of Alone, a Love Story, one of our favorite memoirs of the season. And we're just chatting about how it was a podcast. Well, it made its way into the world at large as a podcast. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask you, Michelle, did you find that there were certain things that sort of worked better or worked in a different way as you were sort of verbalizing it, as you were recording it for radio and podcast?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, like a very common comment about the book or about my writing style is that like I have a very clear voice. Like the voice of the book is the voice of the podcast, which is this voice right now. It's like my writing is very similar, and I do think that comes from like having a broadcast background. Like for 24 years, I've been writing broadcast style scripts, right? Which are meant to be short sentences, conversational sounding, all that kind of stuff. So I don't have like I don't have a formal training at all in anything. So I didn't study literature or writing or anything, right? So I had no preconceived notions of what anything should be. I just write how I write, and that way I write is me. Wait a second. What was your question? Oh, adapting it. And so adapting it made, the things that didn't work obviously on a podcast was because I'm performing it. So I don't have to say he said or she said, because I did all these voices, not voices, like it wasn't really like funny voices or anything, but like I changed. No, yeah. So, you know, you take that kind of stuff out. You could take out some exposition or like, you know, things like she exclaimed, like you could hopefully hear I am exclaiming. I don't know. That's a bad example, but you know what I mean? Yeah, those are the differences. And then in the book, the difference I think that I like a lot, because I'm such a visual person, is because some of the vignettes are only like one line, like that's the whole chapter. It's one line, or not chapter, but the little story, or it's a poem all of a sudden. Like I'm kind of just freeform. And then, you know, in one vignette, there's this like, script, like a teleplay, like a screenplay, because I say like the conversation my husband and I are having, it's about nothing, even though it's about something, and that reminds me of a David Mamet play. And then you turn the page and it's like the dialogue is like a David Mamet play, and I love that, and it's in like typewriter type, and so those kind of fun things obviously don't translate on the radio, but then there were things for the audio that couldn't translate to the book, and so they are different enough in that sense.
Yeah, and
but it's definitely my voice.
Yeah, and
in both places.
Anyone that loves the book to go and check out the podcast, or vice versa. I think it sort of forms two parts of a whole that's really, really interesting.
Thanks.
So the podcast actually, like you said, it kind of became a pretty big deal in the world of podcasting. How, I mean, I'm sure you put it out there because you knew there was something good to it, but what was it like to start getting, all of this attention for it?
It was kind of wild. I mean, because I really didn't know. That's the thing. Like I knew it was good, and I knew that if people heard it, that they would connect with it. But I didn't know how many people would hear it. Right. You know what I mean? And I didn't know if it would be painted as a, jilted, like this is a story only like jilted 40-year-old women would like,
As
like
not one of those, I'll
yeah.
sort of push back on that.
Exactly. No, but that was my fear because I knew it wasn't that. Like I knew in my heart of hearts, and I knew because of whoever had read it but like once it was out there and it had like 400,000 downloads in the first few days, which is insane for a CBC podcast that isn't an investigative, like all those, not a true crime, all the true crime podcasts, forget it. They have like 1 million every second or whatever. But like for a regular podcast where there's nobody like murdered, it did really well. And I was like, well, it can't be I don't have that many friends and family. So, and then it went to #1 in Australia where I know nobody. So, I mean, stuff like that was very cool. But the coolest part was getting all these letters and emails and like physical mail, every single day for about 1.5 years, every single day, like every day. And now I get still stuff like once a week or a couple of times a week. It really depends. And like 90% of them start with thank you. And that's the greatest thing ever. Like I never really expected that or thought that. Like here's this story. I don't know. That part has been amazing. But at least it's proof to me that like, this isn't just a story. It's like, oh, so your husband cheated on you. Like, who cares, right? Like, at the end of the day, like, I'm not even sure I would read that book. Like, if that's all that it was about. So I'm really glad that people didn't just, like, discount it it's just some woman, like, belly aching about her husband cheating on her, because that's really not what it's about.
Yeah.
So did that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Woo! That's why I'm a writer, not a speaker.
So I think we're probably going to have to wrap it up pretty soon. But I'm just wondering, what are you reading now? What are you connecting with right now that you're really enjoying?
I just read Women Talking by Miriam Toews. I don't know how to say her last name. Taves. I'm terrible at how to say her last name. I loved that book. So I just finished that. And I'm right now in the middle of reading an advanced copy of a book called How to Lose Everything by Krista Couture, which is a memoir, but is Canadian also. And it's just so lovely. Like the writing is just so like full of light and life, even though it's actually a book about loss also, but it's beautiful. So I'm really enjoying that. I'll probably finish it tonight.
That's fantastic. And where can people follow you or read more or listen more to some of your excellent work, just so that we've got somewhere for them to go afterwards?
Yeah, I made you this little sign. Can you see it?
Oh, amazing.
No, it's backwards. It's Michelle-Parise.com because some bot stole Michelle-Parise.com. You know what I mean? I think that's the best.
Podcast charts, so it's all over for you.
That's the best place. Michelle-Parise.com. That's where everything is, like in one spot. So that I would send you there.
So you wrote this beautiful thing on Instagram the other day about the CNE closure that really warmed my heart about. One day there's going to be corn dogs and skee ball and everything will be great. Is there anything that you're particularly looking forward to once we get out of this place?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that post, thank you. I wrote that because I was sad about the CNE, and then I felt guilty about feeling sad about the CNE of all things when like there's all these terrible things happening. But then I remembered like, no, that's the whole point of my book also is like not to scorecard our suffering against one another, you know, and so it's okay to mourn the loss of the CNE. It's okay if I mourn the loss of my marriage in a way that you wouldn't. Like that's okay. It's okay if you're sad your graduation ceremony isn't happening. Like that doesn't mean we also can't acknowledge and understand that the world is a very complicated place where more terrible things are happening. All these things can exist at once. And so I just think people should be easy on themselves. That was what I wanted to say in that post. Like, it's okay. But that's not your question. You said, what am I looking forward to? I'm looking forward to, you know, walking around more because I only go for walks at nighttime now, because I live downtown. There's just so many people around, and, that'll be nice to be going outside, like other than my balcony in the daytime would be nice. And I'm looking forward to people who haven't had, you know, physical contact, to be able to have physical contact again, because those of us that do have it, like, we're very, very, very fortunate, in this time. Like, I think it's 2 months. It's a long time without a hug. So I really look forward to seeing people get hugs.
Well, that's a wonderful note to end on. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us again. The book is Alone, a Love Story by Michelle Parise. I highly, highly recommend that you all go out and buy it this moment. Michelle, thanks so much. We'll talk